Hello, everybody, and welcome to another conversation in our series on seeking harmony. And so today we have identified a number of topics that we feel speak to some core truths in what is happening in the world at the moment. And we believe that there are some very clear trends in what we are observing at the moment. So there's been a lot of items in the news lately about, or newsworthy pieces about leadership and leadership challenges. There's been a continued focus on gun control and what that should or should not look like. So yeah, it's kind of been quite a situation of really unpacking the truth of the situation and really asking ourselves the question, what is humanity or the world calling for right now in these situations? And so for today, in those topical pieces, we want to explore that golden thread of what we believe is the call in consciousness, and unpack the truth of what that call, or what those pieces are showing us in terms of what consciousness is asking for. So I'm going to open it up to the team and invite anybody to share the first piece that they believe was really something that stood out in this week's process of finding topics, and just what's newsworthy and what stood out for them and really what it brings up for them. And let's see how that, at an individual level, may echo what is happening at the level of consciousness, or what is being asked for at the level of consciousness.
Hey. Well, Sage gave us a great summary of what is happening in Japan right now. And in Japan, what is happening is that the former prime minister got murdered by someone for personal and religious factors, and but also political factors, basically. And yeah, so basically that person murdered him because like the murderer's mother got scammed by a religion. Like he believes that she lost all her money to that religion, and the prime minister was supposedly like supporting that religion. And also he very publicly said that you know, economically, like the choices of the prime minister weren't great, and that you know, policies on supporting the people financially and in healthcare when following like the crisis, like, you know, people wanted support, and that's something that other people in the political landscape of Japan pointed out as well. And so I found the story like very, it's like there were many, many levels to the story. Sage, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I found that like most topics that we chose today, like there were like so many levels to read the story, and it was complex, but it boiled down to, it was as if like people were fed up with something, and so yeah, it's like a dam broke, and that happened to like wake up the world to like what is happening, like suffering, lack of support, and yeah, I find it like deeply complicated, and yeah, I want to know, like, Isaiah and Sage, like, what do you feel about that?
I feel that the one thing that's coming up for me right now about this is that, you know, in Japan, gun control is very strict, and it's like, it's not impossible, it's almost impossible, or just very difficult in Japan to get a gun. And so this person who assassinated the former prime minister, he got around that by creating his own gun, you know, at home. And I felt that that shows that ultimately, you know, I mean, taking these measures to like restrict guns and make sure that, you know, they don't get into the wrong hands as well is really important, because I think they said in the articles that I read, they were saying like in Japan in 2021, they had like 21 gun-related crimes in a country of how many? Doesn't Japan have like over 100 million people, you know, in their country, something like that? And yeah, they didn't have very much gun crime. Like that's like such a tiny amount. And so for so many people, and so I don't think that it shows that gun control is not legitimate, because like it obviously can reduce gun deaths, but I think it's more so just showing us that doing all those things on the external is a really good measure. And then to fully put this problem away, I feel like it's showing that it's something deep about healing our sickness collectively, healing the anger, healing whatever fuels these attacks, healing you know, healing our feeling of safety and stuff like that. It just shows like how important that is, because you know, yeah, because like just focusing on a problem on the outside, you can do some really good things, but then there's still the possibility that things happen, you know, outside of that. But yeah, that struck me, because I was like, wow, Japan has really strict gun control, you know, and then this happened in light of, you know, in the US, we're having all these news stories about guns being used in, you know, mass shootings. So I thought that was interesting, but yeah. And it also kind of reminds me, the one other thing that jumped out to me about it too, and you guys can feel free to riff off of this, is how it just reminds me of, I was reading that in Japan, like some people were feeling distrustful of like foreign religious organizations. And there are some conspiracy theories saying that those organizations were basically doing spying, doing espionage. And it seems kind of like, I don't know, it seems like a conspiracy theory, right? And that church that Abe supported in some ways was based in Korea, you know? So it's just something that I noticed, is that there seems to be an increase like globally in people who are like searching for something to identify whatever problems that they're facing, and just maybe they're finding like a conspiracy theory or something, and those feelings are growing. So those are the two things I noticed from it. Yeah. So, although with that guy, it seemed like personal. So, yeah.
Love what you pointed out, that we can't just look at it externally. Like we have to look at why, like what is the cause, what's the core of what's really going on here with all of the anger and all of the hatred that we're just seeing, that we're seeing in these stories. So what do you guys feel it is? What do you think the core of it is?
You brought up something interesting, Sage. The fact that people have been like mounting this conspiracy theories about like really outsider religious groups. I just like resonated in me because Japan, they don't trust outsiders very easily. It's in their history, even like up to recently. So they may have something to heal in terms of like trust and harmony and cooperation with other countries, because accepting like outsiders on their territory is something that is still sensitive for people. That's what it brought up to me. So maybe it might be, for that specific topic, maybe it might be part of the answer. Isaiah, is what I feel. Yeah.
So another thing that kind of stands out to me is something that we probably touched on a while ago, is the energy of sowing discord through propaganda. And Japan has been very instrumental in controlling what happens in their media and those kind of things. It's probably been one of the countries that has applied probably the strictest controls of not allowing outside influences in. And it's something that we saw within the propaganda in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where soldiers were told that they're going on a military exercise, only to then find out that they were actually the aggressor in the situation. So I feel like that there's something to heal around trust, but also something to heal around control, because it is very much a controlled culture. It is probably something that's quite entrenched in the way their national system really runs. And that's why when you compare something like gun control across such a significant population, it would make sense that there are it's not even a decimal point. It's kind of 3 to 4 decimal points kind of removed, almost not even worth reporting kind of thing. But for me, that stems from the significant control that's exercised in that country. And you see it across the media, you see it across guns, you see it across just the culture in terms of the fact that it's a very paternalistic culture. So there's those kind of things that come into play. So something that you asked, Isaiah, was like, what else could we possibly seeing? Because it possibly be seeing. And it might even be that there's healing required around how the masculine actually shows up and how the masculine actually leads.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Like, what do you mean by that? In terms of like Shinzo Abe, the minister?
So in terms of the fact that it's such a paternalistic culture.
Mm-hmm.
So the masculine is very much more revered in that culture than the female is. And so by extension, what would be the masculine's portrayal of showing up energetically? It would be the energy of control. It would be the energy, the paternalistic energy. It would be a very directive, very, for lack of a better word, almost exclusive type of energy. So it might just also speak to misunderstanding what the masculine in society and in humanity actually represents.
How do you see that? I was thinking that maybe you see it in, it was interesting because, Tetsuya Yamagami, who murdered the prime minister, it seemed like he was, like protecting his mom, or he was trying to avenge his mom. And that's kind of an interesting trope too, because it shows how, there might be kind of like that feeling. Maybe he was somewhat feeling like, oh, as my mother's son, I need to protect her or something like that, and obviously that didn't actually accomplish like protecting her. It didn't do anything divine or good there. But
Yeah.
is that what you're referring to, or are you referring specifically?
So it's a combination. It's that. Well, that wasn't quite the angle I was looking at it from. But when you take it to that extent, it still kind of speaks to me of really unpacking what is the masculine's place in society and how he shows up and what he stands for.
Yeah, I know. Like he's
that's quite a strong cultural component of the Japanese culture.
Yeah, it's kind of a universal thing, like being, like, oh, my boyfriend will beat you up, kind of thing,
So I don't think it's as universal as we think. I feel like there's a lot of very maternalistic cultures. So there's a lot of cultures where the woman or the mother, let's say the mother figure is more revered. Yes, the man stands in his masculinity, but the feminine is potentially much more revered in certain cultures than in others. And I don't believe that Japan's culture is one where the feminine is as revered.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting too, because it feels like for Japan, it ties up to their story of a warrior and honor and avenging people. That's what I kind of heard when you said it, Sage. So yeah, it's like it's still something that is present in Japan's culture. So not to say that everyone thinks like that, but there's definitely like, cultures, they transcend generations. So if there is an intergenerational healing to be had, it would probably include that. Because like I was wondering like what, avenge the mother, sure, but what is the killing of a religious leader or a political leader going to do for her exactly? In what sense? And I feel like I can't really understand it. And I don't know if it's because it's a different culture than mine, but it might be. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it obviously doesn't make sense. Like, it's interesting. Like when it just doesn't make sense. And it just reminds me of when I was doing my spiritual work last night. I was just writing out my thought processes, because I had something upset to work through. And I was like, oh, that like none of these thoughts bring me any peace or joy, and they don't make any sense. And so I think that if he were to do that, or if we were to do that with what was going on with that, it wouldn't make any sense. But I was thinking that it might have been just because, of like just, like ego trying to be as like high profile and dramatic as possible, because he was probably maybe the most high profile person associated with that church. He wasn't even a member of the Unification Church at all. At least not publicly if he was, but he just, had supporters from that church and gave paid speeches for church events, So I think it might have been that he was going for, or he believes maybe that the government is allowing these foreign religious groups to come and take influence in Japan. That could be it too. And they're like, I expect you, the government, to protect us against these foreigners, these foreign influences that might come. And you know what I mean? And that could be an element of it too, which is something to be healed too, because Yeah, like you said, trust, being able to trust people, regardless of where they're from. Yeah.
It also feels just like a misunderstanding of power. Like, what is power? Like, true power is not control and anger. True power is love. It's actually, and I think that that's where this comes from, is like actually understanding that power is not control and anger or any of those things, but it's actually peace, and it's love, and it's when you can actually connect with yourself. And like I, especially within the masculine consciousness, I feel that there's this disconnect, or there's a misunderstanding there that to be powerful, you have to be controlling and angry. But that's not power at all. That's the opposite of power. Power is actually love, and peace, which we know here. But of course, there's just a broad misunderstanding of that, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and something else that just also kind of popped up is I also feel like the link here speaks to still that energy of separation of church and state. So it's this influence of supposed foreign churches in terms of the Church of Unification in that space, and this link to government and the expectation that there should be a separation. So it's not fueling a system of unification or unity. It's actually fueling the exact opposite, which is really contributing to expecting greater levels of separation between those two entities.
Yeah. I don't know the nature of the speeches that Shinzo Abe gave at those church events, but I don't know though. I feel like I know that when you're like the leader of a country, everything that you do might have some like influence of the state or something. But, I feel like there's like, you could go be like a paid speaker at a church event, on one day, and then you could, also still be the prime minister of your country, maybe. But I agree with that though, because I think that there's probably those feelings of like wanting to keep them separate, church and state separate. And again, I don't like know the details of it or anything.
Yeah, I don't know how much there's like the separation of church and state really varies from country to country. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it really is in Japan. But yeah, that question is on the whole other territory of like church and state, like what should be their relationship. Yeah, I was just thinking like naturally, like we've seen resignation of leaders all over the world, and like what do you feel is our next topic? Because like there are several like situations in several countries that we could discuss. Yeah, what do you feel about like the resignation of leaders in several countries?
So I kind of feel like that's probably just to highlight very high level some of the countries that we've seen in the news over the last week. So with like Sri Lanka, where there was violence with the house of I think it was the president and the prime minister.
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Being occupied by civilians because of the fact that they are in such dire straits as a country from an economic point of view. Then we have, in South Africa, we have our very own president being asked to appear before certain commissions because of not reporting criminal activity on his farm. So literally $4 million was stolen from his farm, and he didn't really report it at the correct levels. We've seen Boris Johnson in the UK literally choose to step down because of a vote of no confidence from his own party.
Okay.
There's been, and I don't know if any of you've seen it, but there was a few weeks ago, even just a question around Joe Biden's mental health. And when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, there was a question around Vladimir Putin's mental and physical health. So I feel like there's a lot of things around challenging the effectiveness of leadership at the government level that says to me, nations are asking for a level of change and a level of confidence in their leadership. And that's really the thing that stands out to me more, is that after 2.5 years of COVID restrictions and lockdowns and back and forth between health regulations, now we get into a situation where where there are global conflicts, sanctions being applied, nations walking out of the United Nations against certain speeches being made by aggressor states. For me, there really is an energy of saying, right, enough is enough. We need leadership that we can actually be confident in.
Yeah. And to mention that the Sri Lankan president fled to the Maldives, which is not good for his image and his government. And that's what kickstarted the protest, the Biden protest, I guess. And also like Boris Johnson, people like had a vote on no confidence after all the scandals and possibly his entanglement in like criminal, illegal activity. But like people from his party, they resigned, a lot of them, after weeks, and there was protests before his house, which is very unusual for the UK. Very, very unusual to see like the gravity of how the people expressed how they were displeased by what happened. So there is definitely like, for me, there's definitely a thing where we see that people like they actually do really care a lot about the state of their nation, first of all, and yeah, leaders have a lot of responsibility and should potentially like be trained, be chosen, knowing that there is a level of like responsibility and a level like showing the example to their nation, because people count on them, you know. And so if there is a level of disrespect in any way of that for a nation, for who wants democracy, who wants to let their people like speak up, there's definitely going to be like, I feel more and more people speaking up against that government and saying, hey, this is not okay. And we won't change there, you know.
I also think the other thing that we need to probably remember is that An election campaign is literally tantamount to an interview process. So if you were an employer, you would be putting that person through a process before you employed them in your company. And for me, the selection process is literally an extended job interview. And that public servants tend to lose sight of the fact that they're actually employed by a nation. They are employed to do a job. That is what is happening under these circumstances. And so it's important to also know that at any given time, that employment decision can also change if they don't deliver. And it's starting to become more and more apparent that people understand the power of their vote to influence that employment decision.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like there is more of a feeling among people that they can like recall, you know, a politician, or, and it's cool that we're seeing, it's interesting that we're seeing it like kind of happen all at once in like multiple different countries. Yeah, and I thought the Sri Lankan case was interesting to me because it seemed like based on the I don't really know too much about the situation there, but I did read up on it to some extent before this, and it seems like maybe the prime minister or the president or the prime minister is the one who is like the U.S. president, right, who makes executive orders, and the president is more of a figurehead. Is that correct? I'm sorry. I'm yeah, I don't know. Is that how it is in those president prime minister systems?
I think, yeah, it's more like the government is the head of state, and the president has less of a lesser power, I guess, more symbolic power.
Yeah, well, I see, but I guess I could say the whole government, maybe the prime minister and the president, I guess, of Sri Lanka. It seems like they were maybe protecting the interests of a few, like of the elite or some people who they were close to, because it seems hard to explain their behavior otherwise, because it looked like they were, so the value of their exports and what the country was producing was smaller than the amount of debt that they had, the amount of money that they were borrowing, rather, the amount of debt they were taking on. And so, you know, that caused their credit rating to go down, and then they couldn't get foreign currency. And without foreign currency, they couldn't do foreign trade, which I didn't know. And so that would mean that they couldn't import vital things. And so they decided, first, this struck me as being really interesting. Like, first they decided that we're going to stop importing fertilizer, and we're going to go, it's interesting how they branded it, because they said, we're going organic. All Sri Lankan farming is organic now. Or they also said that local fertilizer companies will take over and fill in, which they had some, but they had very little. I guess a lot of fertilizer was imported in Sri Lanka. And the reason they were doing this is because if they don't import fertilizer, then they can save their foreign currency reserves, you know, rather than making it all go into importing fertilizer. And so, and then after fertilizer, they ratcheted it up even more and banned imports of luxury goods, which is even more serious, because, you know, I know that when you're building a country, luxury goods come before fertilizer. Yeah. But that just made me laugh. You know, they're like, not the luxury goods. But to me, it does seem like mismanagement and corruption. And that, coupled with the fact that shortly before he resigned and this all came to a head, I think president, I don't know, I'm sorry, but the president Rajapaksa was announcing a tax cut And it's like, dude, if you have a deficit, you can't do a tax cut. You need to raise money. You know, you're trying to cut taxes while you have no money. So it just seems like classic corruption, mate. You know what I mean? Like when I look at all of this, I'm like, who's benefiting? You know, why is he making all these moves? You know, I don't know.
And now the parallel between the government and the company is even like more present in my mind, because it's like when a company has bad management and they do bad decisions, very bad decisions, and now they face bankruptcy, which should not have to happen to a country, basically. Yeah. But we see it happen in countries. It's true. Like we've seen it in like many countries over the years, but with like several governments being treated as a company and with not a good management. And it's kind of weird because, not weird, I guess it's like if you're treating this like a multinational company, then of course like most of the profits or almost everything is going to go to the heads of a company. But you've been elected on the promise to keep your people safe. And yeah, that's just, a gap in values. And that would explain why the people were like so angry and started a protest that seems so chaotic on the outside.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder too how these things manifest, you know, because like why is it that some of these countries or you know are manifesting that, like the corruption and stuff like that, you know. It is very interesting thing to look at, you know, why that happens. I was reading last night and it was saying that corruption is also, you know, increased in the United States as well, though. You know, it's been on the increase in, like, for example, the US. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. But yeah, did you have something to say about that?
I was just thinking that, you know, a few months ago, Jeff wrote a blog for Twin Flames Universe, which is like choices and the tidal wave of consequences and something like that. And it just made me think that, you know, when you've done like a few bad choices and you thought you could get away with it, like it obviously always comes back because this is the law of the universe, and that's just how it works. So we could look at a country and look at, okay, what was this bad decision? Oh, they made a bad decision on taxes. They chose themselves instead of the people, and that was not their job. So, you know, they're paying that in terms of like, you know, karmic debt or universal law. It's just what it makes me think about. But it could be like a lot of things, like a lot of bad choices coming up to a head, or yeah, that's just what I thought.
Yeah, and I think, you know, something that probably stands out quite a bit is that those bad choices, if they stack up. So, you know, it can't remain hidden for long. They stack up, and the consequence is that the situation progressively deteriorates. And one of the things that's probably something that we do need to just bear in mind is COVID made us pay more attention to a lot more things. Things that we probably would have not necessarily considered as much, for the reason that we all couldn't move around too much. We were kind of confined to the space of seeing what's happening in the news while we remain in our houses and that kind of stuff. So it did force us to pay a lot more attention to what was happening in the world around us. And so all of those situations, I mean, stacking up in terms of how expensive vaccinations became, in terms of the strain on the availability of resources for countries that were already economically strained, the strain on mineral resources, because literally one of the biggest suppliers in the world is now no longer being allowed to supply for reasons of sanctions, which has really shifted the cost of living across the world for many people. I can't imagine that there's any countries that may not have, that are not in one way or another felt the effect of the volatility of those commodities and the price of those commodities. So it's literally years of being fatigued through struggle. And the fact of the matter is while we may be resilient as human beings, something has to give at some point. Something has to improve. And I agree with you, Sage, that we do need to heal it on the internal, but we also need our economies to enable some of those shifts. It's literally one of those situations where we are now in the space of, we're not of the world, but we still operate within the world. And if things in the world are shifting in an uncomfortable direction, it is going to make your personal circumstances a little bit more uncomfortable. And then we have to look at an economy like Sri Lanka and realize that it's not one of the richest economies in the world, probably one of the poorer economies in the world. So mismanagement in that space exacerbates the situation. And unfortunately, we have seen that there comes a time where something has got to give, or something gets broken, or something breaks. And I just feel like there's a place at which they probably reached a little bit of a breaking point, especially where we now consider that some of the decisions may have been in favor of a very small elite against a country of people that were nowhere near that status. And that gap between the elite and the not elite is widening. It's not actually diminishing, it's actually widening. The haves seem to have more, and the have-nots seem to have less.
It's like we often, documentaries about the world and like geopolitics, we often like hear that the richest people have gone richer and the poorest people have gone poorer. And just something to keep in mind in that situation. So there's definitely like something in the system that doesn't work, and it's got to give at some point, And it reminds me of something that Jeff said in the wake of like Roe versus Wade being overturned. He said this about the Supreme Court, but he said, when the leaders, when the leaders go against what the people are wanting, are desiring, are crying for, they get, the people get to replace them, and yeah, we just have to realize that and trust that the people, they have power. They are the one who make the choices, and they just elect someone for these choices to be put in place. And also, we're on a planet that consciously or unconsciously wants peace. So, the people will always tell you, like, what's the message under what you're doing. And if you got like people flooding your house as a prime minister, yeah, it's probably not good, And you need to look at the choices that you made there.
Yeah, no, I almost feel like it's not even just a situation of trusting that people realize that they have power. It's, for me, it goes a little bit to the extent of that they kind of trusting that they actually realize that they can use that power. For the change that they are asking for, they can use that power to affect that change. I think that is probably the core of the power of choice, is realizing that you can actually exercise that power.
Yeah, that's fine. So we have a last topic to talk about, and it's about the details of behind the Illinois shooting on the 4th of July. And yeah, I'm curious to know, like, Sage, do you want to give us the details and what you feel about this situation?
Yeah, the details of that situation were like, they were surprising to me. I was like, yeah, I was a little shocked to read it, but at the same time, yes.
Is this the Highland? Oh, is this the Highland Park one? Okay.
Yeah, the Highland Park 4th of July shooting that happened last week. I was reading about like the details of that, and the guy's name was Robert Cremo, who did the shooting. And so Illinois has the state of Illinois has stricter gun laws than other states in the US. And but there were some like lapses in it, essentially. One of them is like a red flag law allows somebody who knows someone to say, this person needs their weapons confiscated because they're a danger to themselves or others. But the thing about this guy who did the mass shooting is that nobody around him would have supported having his weapons taken away. And so that was one thing that was the case. It was clear that people around him weren't too concerned. And secondly, so, obviously you in Illinois, you have to obtain a gun license to be able to purchase guns. And then they run the background check on you and everything. And so twice the police had to visit his house or come to him, this guy who did the shooting. Once because he threatened his own life. And then a second time because he was making threats to other people. And the second time when they came to his house, which he was under 18 at the time, I believe, or perhaps he was still a teenager, and he was living with his parents, or at least his dad. And they found that he had like 16 knives, a dagger, which I guess is a bigger knife. I'm not much of a weapons person, and a sword. This boy had all of that. And I'm like, this is either like an extreme weapons collection enthusiast or someone who's really unstable. And I think it was probably the latter, at least. And the police confiscated all of his weapons. And then his dad was like, oh, it's okay. Like, give them back. they're his, it's fine. And so the police returned the weapons to him the same day, even though he had made threats to people of some sort. And so I don't know why this came that way, but we've been talking about in America, there's a more permissive attitude toward people having weapons. I don't know, because, well, I don't know, we can talk about it. But then, so when he applied for his gun license, his father endorsed this guy for the gun license. He said, yeah, it's okay. And this kid, so when they ran the background check, the system did not yet have the information of the 2 police visits. So the police visited him for a suicide threat and for a threat on other people. And that information was not in their system. So he cleared the background check. I think that's what I read. And he was able to like stock up on these weapons, including a semi-automatic rifle. And that's what he used for the shooting. So it just really brings up like how there seems to be like this energy of laxness and permissiveness, you know, in both Robert Cremo's family. At least his dad seemed kind of like that. I don't want to like accuse him or anything, but it seemed a little irresponsible. And then the police not having their stuff together to be able to know this guy's background. So yeah, I wanted to know what you guys thought about all of that. What do you feel the truth is of the situation?
I feel like it's just really neglectful too. Like, and Sage and I talked a bit about this too, and we were saying like maybe it shouldn't be someone who is close to a person that is able to determine if they can have a gun. Like, I don't think that's a good idea. And also, I feel like it's just complete neglect, like of a parent or someone close to that person. How do you not know or care that that person is not obviously not stable? And like, if you were just paying attention or not being, also like the fact that the police didn't have those reports, that also points to neglect or inattention. Like, why are these things not being given the proper attention and the proper action according to like the information that's there, or the stability or lack thereof that's there for these individuals, you know?
Doesn't it reflect like a lack of attention nationwide? Because Sage, a few weeks ago, you said that, I think it was you who said that basically why something that demands such a responsibility, such a care, because like it can be used for violence. Basically, it can harm people. Not be like so controlled as to, you know, prevent that it gets into the hands of like dangerous people or like unstable people. So maybe like it's like a reflection of like a lack of attention nationwide, which is like so obviously so dangerous with like things that can do such harm. Yeah, that's just my first thought about it. And then you know, the endorsement of like a family member as a third party, you know, maybe like the origin of that was of good intention.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, you know, proof that the person is stable, but it's probably been completely misused. And this is an example of how it can be misused.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you want someone who knows the person. Like, I was thinking like maybe a teacher or something. I know it's hard to assess people sometimes, and it's not like this is just one piece of the whole puzzle. Like having someone like write an endorsement letter for someone to get a gun license. I think it would be logical to have someone who knows somebody decently, but isn't so close to them that they might be like biased. You know what I mean? Because a family member might not want to, like, you know, or a family member could be biased. Yeah.
So my feeling is a little bit different there. I do feel like it is important to have the input of somebody as close to that person as possible. But I don't believe, and I mean, especially if this is the case of, in the case of a minor, like I have to then question the father's sense of responsibility. You know, it's almost impossible. Like if he was living with his father, it would, to me, strike me as virtually impossible for the father not to know about a suicide threat or a threat against other people. And then for the father to still say to police, well, actually, it's okay, give him back his weapons. It says to me, it really does speak to me of a significant lapse in judgment. And like, even, you know, like I watched the video that was attached to the article that you shared with us, and even another relative in the family said, well, you know, if it was me, I would not have endorsed him. So you kind of have to question what was the father actually doing? You know, like, I can't, for me, I can't, if it was me personally, it was my child, I would be more concerned that they'd harm themselves than anybody else. And I would not have said, well, give them back however many knives and a dagger and a sword. Like, no. In fact, maybe lock them up in a white padded room so they really can't hurt themselves, you know? That would have been my sense of what the situation was calling for. Yeah. Not the exact opposite of, oh, well, you know, 59 is just going to fly through the air. It's okay. He can't hurt himself. He's going to throw it at somebody else. No.
Yeah, what I get from that is just like, can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, what I get from that is like just complete passiveness, laziness, and just neglect, because that entire situation makes me think about what happened in Buffalo, because this kid was living with his parents and brother and they didn't know about this. And like the fact that they weren't even aware of like this child having ammunition in his bedroom is just like, it's mind-blowing. It's really crazy. And it also makes me think about well, since the parents aren't going to do it, like there are gun laws that are coming into play right now. I can't speak for any other state, but I know that there is a law being prepped to pass saying that every gun owner has to submit all of their social media accounts to purchase a gun in New York. I don't know if it's anywhere else, but I can only speak for New York. Yeah. So yeah, just neglect, laziness, and passiveness from these parents.
Yeah. And you know how, like, right now to log into an account, you have to have like multiple factor authentication. Why isn't there like a multiple safety check on these things? This also speaks of neglects. Why is our process to get our social media protected more effective than our process to ensure gun safety? That doesn't make sense, you know? And it's just a reflection of how laws have been more neglectful in that space than in, say, virtual spaces, you know? And that's something that we need to catch up on, because like it's obviously like not good. I would want to have like several safety checks for someone to to get munitions, obviously. You know?
Yeah. Agreed. But yeah, thank you everybody for this conversation. We have reached our hour, so I'm going to say thank you to everybody who's joined us and has followed our conversation. We'd like to invite you to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find all our previous conversations, and we look forward to seeing all of you next week. So thank you everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.